Shalom Aleichem. Chaim Malevsky here, Chabad Family Programs. Today on the 18th day of the month of Nisan. Just a few days after our wonderful Seder at Chabad of the West Side. And everywhere else in the world where you may be, I hope your Seder was wild and wonderful and meaningful. And its positive effects should continue to inspire you for the rest of the year. So, the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, the first leader of the Jewish people who took us out of Egypt, who we're celebrating Pesach about, Ve'ish Moshe Anav Ma'od, the man Moshe was very humble. Mikol Pnei Adam, something like that. Anav, Ve'ish Moshe Anav Ma'od, Mikol Ha'adam al Pnei Ha'adama. Moshe was the most humble of all men, all mankind on earth. Now we know Moshe knew his greatness. He wasn't a fool. Oh my gosh. Some nature. Moshe knew his greatness. He was the only one. The Torah itself says that Moshe was the greatest man who ever lived. And V'lo kam od navi b'Yisrael k'Moshe. No one ever arose like Moshe. Asher yada'o Hashem panim al panim. Or God knew him face to face. So, on one hand we have Moshe being the greatest of all men. And on the other hand we have Moshe being the most humble of all men. How could that be? So, and our understanding of humility over here doesn't mean that he feels lower than others, but it means that he recognizes that his talents are God-given and that were he to be in the place of another in a similar situation with a similar talents, perhaps the other may have done better. So that's a general understanding, but the question still is, what does it mean that Moshe was the most humble? Look at us compared to Moshe. So in answer to this question, just yesterday, a friend asked a question that I said, you know how Chabad gives out matzah to as many people as we can? The Rebbe inspired us to make sure that every Jew in the world should have a Seder to go to, have shmur matzah to eat on Pesach Seder night. And so Chabads all over the world are giving out. We, in our Chabad of the West Side, we gave out 500 boxes of matzah and other things. That was the regular big shipment. But there were many more hundreds that were personally distributed by the Chabad rabbis and the families. And many other people do the same thing. It's not just Chabad. Baruch Hashem, the whole world is catching on to the idea that the Rebbe pioneered to make sure that even the fifth son, the one who doesn't show up to the Seder, has his Pesach needs. So a friend of ours, of our family, we'll call her Sarah, she, inspired by this idea of giving matzah, she reached out and gave and distributed matzah to many of her friends, and one of them was an old teacher who came from the Soviet Union, and she arranged for matzah to be distributed in a different city, in a different state. And in response, this teacher from many years ago responded and said, so we'll just call her Sarah. She said, Sarah, are you feeling okay? What got into you? You're still connecting to these ancient traditions? Are you okay? What's going on? Can I help you? Etc., etc. So the question was, did I do the right thing? Am I distributing matzah to people who don't want it? Is that okay? And the like. So in response to that, I'm going to enter here publicly. So Rabbi Manis Friedman recently met with us Chabad rabbis, and he told a story of one of his friends who was having a bad day. Sometime it was in the 60s or the 70s, when there was the mitzvah tanks were standing outside in Manhattan, and these boys were going out. It was on a Friday afternoon. It still happens today. On a Friday afternoon, the mitzvah tanks go out. They're big RVs with room for people to enter. There's a little library in there. There's some food, and scores of yeshiva boys from Crown Heights and elsewhere go out on the streets and invite men and boys to put on tefillin and distribute Shabbat candles to the women, and give out Torah pamphlets and invite people in for a prayer or for a study session, etc. So one time this man, let's call him David, was having a bad day, and he walks past one of these mitzvah tanks, and a little boy, Chabad boy, the little black hat, asks him, "Excuse me, sir, are you Jewish?" And he was so miserable that day, and he's like, "Get out of my life." He said, "No," and he walked away in a humph, in a puff. So that happened. A few hours later, David's day was getting better, and he started feeling remorse, regretting what he said. And how could he deny that he's Jewish? Of course he's Jewish. He's been Jewish for thousands of years, of generations, for many generations. He's always been Jewish. And he went back out to look for the mitzvah tank. It was already Shabbos when he came back, and it wasn't there. So the next day, Sunday, he walks by that same space, and he didn't see the tank. We call it a tank, but it's really an RV. And he comes back Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and every day he came back looking for that same little boy and say, "Of course I'm Jewish. How dare I say that I'm not Jewish?" But his no triggered within him a deep response, a deep awakening that he is Jewish, and he was so regretful of even saying the words, "I'm not Jewish," even in a moment of haste, in a moment of waste. Finally, on Friday, the tank came back, and he walked by there looking for that boy, and he was going to grab him and hug him and say, "Yes, I'm Jewish, take me in." And ended up being someone else who was there, and before he said anything, he said, "Yes, I'm Jewish, come wrap me up, do whatever, whip me, do whatever you need to do." Okay, and this transformed his life in a positive way. So the point over here is that the negativity, the response, the negative response of, "No, I'm not Jewish," also triggered something deep within this person, which I told my friend, our family friend Sarah. I said, "This is sure to happen with your teacher also." That she said, she questioned why you are observing these ancient traditions, but really it's going to spark within her something special. Now, aside from that, what to answer to this person, I thought maybe a simple answer to the effect of, this I found great deep meaning and relevance in the Jewish traditions in my life, in my family's life, and I invite you to explore and hope you're open-minded to do the same, and perhaps you'll find similar meaning and relevance, etc. That was the response that I suggested. However, it goes deeper than that. So today, while I was running earlier this morning, I heard a talk from the Rebbe about Moshe Rabbeinu being humble. It was in a completely different topic, but it was just touched upon. And it was from Rabbi. It was a Maimer of the Hasidus, a Hasidic discourse from the Rebbe from 1952. It was being translated by Rabbi Yossi Paltiel InsideChassidus.net. It's a plug. The great teacher. And here's one of the points. This is not the main point of the mimer at all. It's a beautiful thing, and I hope to review it here one day. I feel myself as a transmitter. If I learn something exciting, inspiring, I like to share it here. So, none of this is mine. It's all the Rebbe's, God's. So, the question was about Moshe. How could it be that Moshe was so humble? So the Talmud and the Zohar, the Kabbalah, say that Moshe Rabbeinu, our leader Moses, the reason why he was so humble was because he saw the generation just prior to the coming of Mashiach, which is our generation, the final generation of the exile. And he was inspired by them. And he was amazed by their commitment. And the previous Rebbes, not our Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, and his father, Reb Shalom Dober, in Russia, they said that Moshe Rabbeinu saw the sacrifice, the dedication, the commitment of the Jewish people in Russia, in the former Soviet Union, where the world was trying to snuff out Judaism, but these people held on steadfastly. The government, the communist government, did what they could to extinguish the fire of Judaism all over Russia and elsewhere. And my great-grandfather and others in my family lineage were actually shot and killed just because they kept the flame of Judaism alive, including my great-grandmother. Her name is Mariasha, after whom I named our youngest daughter, Mariasha, who's now bat mitzvah. She was named Mariasha with the inspiration of my great-grandmother, Mariasha, who, because she didn't want her children to be susceptible, to be exposed to the atheistic teachings of the Russian communist schools, she fled her home, and she hid with her family. Her husband was already gone, shot and killed, and she was a lone mother with 5 children, and she fled and hid for 6 years in a one room of a shul, of a synagogue that was left desolate. There was no running water for 6 years, and they had no heat. For 6 years they lived like that, with nothing, just to get away from the communists, to keep the Jewish tradition alive. When she passed away, there were 650 living Jewish observant people, her descendants, blood descendants. So people like that, the Rebbe said that their commitment to God and to Judaism is what Moshe Rabbeinu, what our leader Moses, was envious of, and he was humbled by. That was then. Our Rebbe, moving on, also back in other forces that tried to snuff out the Judaism, was the Enlightenment movement of the Jewish people, who tried to also relax the insistence and the observance of our rituals, etc., etc. But we overcame, and that was what Moshe was humbled by. Our commitment, our Mesiras Nefesh. Says the Rebbe, our Rebbe, a few years later, he said there's something else Moshe was humbled by, and that is that in today's society there are lots of people who feel so enlightened that they say that the Judaism is ancient, that the rituals are old, and they're already out of date, out of style. Says the Rebbe, these people are called the Mal'igim. Mal'igim are scoffers. In the Code of Jewish Law, the very first halacha, the first law, is al yevosh mipnei hamaligim, to not be embarrassed, to not be ashamed, to not be dissuaded because of the scoffers, because of the mockers and the knockers of Judaism. And so too today, says the Rebbe, the world, we have so many distractions inside and out, in the media, in the social settings, in the various movements that are telling us to leave the past behind and move on. Look at the technology we have today. We don't need the ancient truths. Says the Rebbe, these are the scoffers. Al yevosh mipnei hamalekim. Moshe Rabbeinu was humbled by our commitment and our insistence to keep our faith and keep our traditions and keep our rituals, keep Judaism alive in our families and our children's families, down to the very nitty-gritty. Every single custom, as minute as it may be. And that was what Moshe Rabbeinu was looking forward and seeing, and he was humbled. He was the most humble on the face of the earth, looking at our generation saying, look, Sarah, you will continue giving matzah to your friends and inspiring them to reconnect to their roots, to their ancient traditions for thousands of years, to their family history, to God. And maybe invite your teacher to the Mashiach Suda, which happens on Achron Shel Pesach, Saturday night. God bless you. Shalom from Israel.